October 16th, 1991, lunchtime at Lubys, Cafeteria in Killeen, Texas. Looked like any other busy weekday. Families are eating together. Retirees are catching up over lunch. Co-workers, they were celebrating National Bosses Day.
Hey,
why is that a day?
Right.
Servers moved from table to table carrying trays of hot food. Then, without a warning, a blue Ford Ranger pickup slammed right through the restaurant's front window. The deafening crash sent glass, bricks, and metal flying across the dining room.
Damn.
For a split second, many people believed they had just witnessed a terrible traffic accident. Some diners and employees even started moving toward the wrecked truck, thinking the driver might be hurt and need some help.
Right.
Instead, unlucky for them, the driver climbed out holding 2 9mm pistols.
Oh, shit.
Within seconds, George Hennard, he began firing into the crowded cafeteria. The confusion instantly turned to panic as people dove beneath tables, searched desperately for cover, or just ran for any exit they could find. Parents, they grabbed their kids. Husbands, wives, they reach out for one another. Employees shouted for customers to get down or follow them even towards the kitchen. Let's get back here. What had been an ordinary lunch in the middle of the work week became one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history.
Son of a bitch.
The attack, it lasted only about 12 minutes.
Only? 12 minutes is a long time.
Yeah. By the time it was over, though, 23 innocent people murdered, dozens more injured, an entire community been left traumatized. At the time, no single gunman had killed more people in a mass shooting in modern American history. Tragedy would dominate national headlines, reshape political debates across Texas and beyond, and forever change the lives of hundreds of survivors, first responders, and victims' families. But we got to understand how that horrifying afternoon unfolded.
Okay.
Got to go back long before the truck crashed through the front window. The story didn't begin inside Lubys, obviously. It began years earlier with a man whose life had been steadily falling apart, whose anger had been growing for decades, and whose warning signs were visible, and they always are, long before anyone realized what he was capable of.
Well, let's take a look and understand why so many people were inside Lubys that afternoon. Helps to understand Killeen, Texas, in 1991. Located in Central Texas, Killeen had grown alongside nearby Fort Hood, one of the largest military installations in all of America.
Oh, that's right. Fort Hood was the other mass shooting when that dude went crazy. Yeah.
Soldiers, military families, veterans, retirees, and civilians, they all called this city home. Restaurants, they filled with people in uniform. That wasn't unusual. Local businesses depend heavily on steadily full flow of customers connected to the post. It's the kind of community where people knew their neighbors. Families settled down after military service, and lunch hour was one of the busiest parts of the day. Luby's Cafeteria had become one of those dependable gathering places, known for its cafeteria-style service. Customers would grab a tray, move down the serving line, choosing from hot meals, vegetables, desserts, drinks, and then find a table to enjoy a relaxed lunch, maybe go back for seconds.
Right.
It attracted a wide mix of people every single day. Retired couples, meeting friends, office workers on their lunch, military personnel, local business owners, and just random families looking for an affordable meal. For many people in Killeen, eating at Lubys wasn't a special occasion, simply part of everyday life.
Right.
Now, 16th of October, the restaurant was even busier than usual because it was National Bosses Day. No too many people cared about their bosses like that, huh? Offices and businesses across the area were taking their supervisors and coworkers out for lunch, filling dining rooms throughout the whole city. By shortly after noon, roughly 150 people were inside the cafeteria. Some just started eating. Others were still making their way through the serving line. Conversations filled the room. It was just a chatterbox all over the place. Dishes clattered against trays. And
somebody dropped a bus tub full of dishes.
Right. Employees, they moved between tables, were filling drinks and clearing plates. Nothing to suggest that within minutes, that familiar lunchtime routine would be shattered for life. Well, outside, the weather, clear, traffic, normal. Life continued as always had. No one inside Lubys had any reason to think they were about to become part of a tragedy that would be remembered across the country for decades to come.
Well, George Pierre Hennard, he was born October 15th, 1956, the oldest of 2 sons. His daddy was an army physician. It was a career that meant the family moved frequently as they received new assignments. Like many military brats, Hennard spent his early years living in different places before the family eventually settled in Central Texas.
Okay.
On the surface, it may have looked like a stable upbringing. His father held a respected profession. The family was financially comfortable, and no obvious reason to expect the path that Hennard's life would eventually take.
I'm guessing his dad was a fucking bastard and his mom was a drunk or something.
Well, behind closed doors, the picture was far less stable. According to later accounts from family members, neighbors, investigators, his parents' marriage was deeply troubled. Arguments between his mom and dad were frequent, often intense, creating a tense atmosphere at home.
I bet.
As the years passed, Henry developed an increasingly bitter relationship with his mom, blaming her for many of the frustrations and disappointments in his life.
Okay, so maybe he got along with his daddy.
Whether those feelings were rooted in reality or shaped by his own growing paranoia, can't know that. But investigators would later conclude that resentment toward his mom became one of the defining influences on his worldview.
Fucking mommy issues.
As a young man, he never seemed to establish a clear direction in life. People who knew him described him as quiet, but capable of becoming argumentative and hostile without much warning. A short fuse, huh?
Yeah.
Struggled to build lasting friendships and had difficulty maintaining healthy relationships with women. Thanks, Mom.
Right.
Rather than accepting responsibility when things went wrong, guess what he did? He blamed everybody else for his problems.
Usually what happens.
That tendency would only become stronger as he got older, gradually hardening into a deep sense that the world had treated him unfairly. Okay. That's when people start going off the rails, is when they get in their mind that they're getting treated unfairly by the world.
Which is insane. None of this meant those around him expected he would one day commit mass murder.
Maybe himself. Maybe some people are like, he's probably going to kill himself.
Plenty of people grew up in unhappy homes or experienced failed relationships without returning to violence. But looking back after the shooting, investigators saw a pattern that had been developing for years. The anger, the resentment, the inability to accept personal failures, and growing hostility toward others didn't appear overnight. They were part of a slow progression that would continue throughout childhood and adulthood, becoming more pronounced with each passing year until his life began to unravel completely. As old Hennard entered adulthood, he never found the stability that many people eventually settle into. He left home. He joined the United States Merchant Marine, a career that allowed him to work aboard commercial ships traveling around the whole world, so he got to see it all. And for a time and period, he had found a path that suited him. The work provided a steady paycheck, a structure, and it was also an opportunity to build a future. So there you go, buddy. There's your opportunity.
Well,
that future didn't last. During his time in the Merchant Marine, Hennard developed problems with marijuana.
Well, whatever.
No such thing. And after disciplinary issues, he eventually lost his position. It was another setback that he blamed on others rather than accepting the result of his own decisions. I mean, what are you going to do? It's just a little bit of pot.
Yeah, but in the military,
right.
Especially after NAM and all that shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Over the next several years, his life became increasingly unstable. He drifted between jobs. He struggled to establish a good career. He never really found the kind of long-term success that he believed he deserved. Financial problems became more common. He often lived alone with few meaningful relationships. Friends, scarce. Romantic relationships, even scarcer. And his sense of isolation only deepened. Instead of trying to rebuild his life and look deep in his soul and say, what is the problem? It can't be everybody else. It has to be me, right? Henry became consumed by bitterness. He was convinced that society, especially women, they were responsible for his failures. Those beliefs hardened over time, leaving little room for self-reflection or personal accountability. If you don't have personal accountability.
Well, if that's not enough, his legal troubles, they begin to mount. 1981, he was convicted on a marijuana-related charge, added to a growing... It's Texas, too. They still hate weed.
Oh, yeah, Texas.
Added to a growing record that included driving while intoxicated and being caught carrying loaded handguns in his vehicle.
Oh, shit.
None of the offenses predicted the scale of violence that would come years later, but together they painted a little bit of a picture of someone whose judgment was deteriorating. Despite these encounters, Hennard remained free to continue living much as he always had, drifting from one disappointment to the next.
Oh, jeez.
By the late 80s, the gap between the life Hennard imagined for himself and the life he was actually living had become enormous.
Oh, wow.
Rather than adapting or moving forward, he retreated further into anger and resentment. People who encountered him increasingly described him as argumentative, easily offended, and prone to blaming everyone else for his circumstances.
He's a liberal.
Those probably. Those who crossed paths with him, they could see something wasn't right. Few could have imagined beneath the surface, though, that the frustration had begun to grow into something far more dangerous.
Uh-oh.
Now, by the early 90s, his anger had evolved into something far more troubling than simple frustration. Investigators, they later found that he had developed deeply misogynistic views. He believed that women were responsible for nearly every setback in his life. Failed relationships, career disappointments, financial problems, that stupid bank teller.
Right.
And his own unhappiness, they were all blamed on women rather than his own life choices. Over time, those beliefs became increasingly irrational. He spoke about women with open contempt, referred to them in degrading terms, convinced himself that they were somehow conspiring against him and him only.
Right.
Those ideas, they had no basis, obviously, but They became central to the way he viewed the world, and that's not good.
Well, his behavior reflected the growing obsession. Neighbors, acquaintances, they described him as increasingly erratic, argumentative, unpredictable. He reportedly harassed women and girls in his own neighborhood, made unwanted advances, sometimes responding with hostility when rejected. There were also reports that he made threatening phone calls and engaged in behavior that left people feeling uneasy around him. Like, ugh. Looking back after the shooting, many who had encountered Hennard remembered getting the impression that something wasn't right about this guy. He was just off. He seemed like he could be nice, but just something wasn't there. At that time, those incidents were seen as actions of unpleasant and a troubled man rather than warning signs of a future mass murderer. Hennard also become increasingly isolated. And this was a time where, well, I guess it's the early 90s. Well, the serial killing stuff was
What's going on?
Yeah. Hennard also became increasingly isolated. Instead of building friendships or seeking help, he withdrew further from the people around him. He spent much of his time alone, allowing his resentment to grow unchecked. Investigators, they later discovered writings that revealed just how consumed he had become with his hatred and paranoia. They described a man who believed he had been repeatedly wronged, who viewed himself as the victim of forces beyond his control. And he showed this little ability to recognize his own responsibility for the direction his life had taken. That's not my fucking fault. It's that fucking hole across the street.
Fucking assholes over there.
Jeez.
I couldn't get a loan because the bitch CEO
Right.
or something.
Fucking manager was a woman. She didn't want to hire me.
Right.
In hindsight, many people have asked whether the tragedy could have been prevented. Well, you can ask that about every tragedy. The answer is not simple. Hennard displayed numerous warning signs, obviously, but none resulted in him being involuntarily committed or otherwise prohibited under laws that existed at the time from legally purchasing firearms. His behavior, it did alarm some people. There was no single incident that clearly foretold what he could do on that October 16th day.
Right. The only thing he's
1991.
been done so far is get charged with marijuana.
Right.
Like he's not even doing violent things.
Right. But instead, investigators concluded that the attack was a culmination of years and years and years of growing anger, paranoia, isolation, and resentment that steadily intensified until they finally erupted in violence. I mean, it happens. Just get that fucking breakdown and you just
Snap.
snap a Rudy-doo.
By 91, Hennard had moved well beyond simply harboring anger. Investigators concluded that the attack on Lubys was not a spur-of-the-moment thing, but a planned act of mass murder. He sat down and he went through every little detail. Earlier that year, while in Nevada, he legally purchased 2 semi-automatic 9mm pistols. One was a Glock 17 and the other a Ruger P89. He also acquired multiple magazines and a large supply of ammo. At the time, nothing in his criminal record legally prevented him from buying them.
Right.
Although he did have prior arrests and convictions, he's not prohibited under federal law from owning guns.
Right.
Evidence collected after the shooting showed that Hennard had prepared for the attack well before that day.
Really?
He carried numerous loaded magazines, allowing him to upload repeatedly during the assault, and investigators found additional ammo still on his body after his death. The amount of equipment he brought indicated he expected to fire many, many rounds and had no intention of stopping after his first magazine was emptied. Everything pointed to someone who had carefully considered what he was about to do rather than acting on a sudden impulse.
Right.
You could still act on a sudden impulse and know to grab a few magazines.
Right. Oh, he probably just carried with him all the time.
In his truck or something, right? One question investigators worked hard to answer was why he chose Lubys. Despite extensive interviews and a thorough investigations, they never found anything that said he was targeting a specific person inside the restaurant.
Right.
No indication he personally knew any of the victims or even that Lubys had itself any special significance in his life.
Just something happened.
Some have suggested he selected the cafeteria simply because he knew it would be crowded during lunch. Others pointed to the large number of women expected to be dining there on National Bosses Day. These possibilities have been discussed, but investigators, they're never be able to prove exactly.
Women have bosses.
They're probably the most likely ones to go out for
Right.
lunch or something,
Right.
right? Because the boss is a creep trying to get them all.
Yeah.
What is known, though, is that he arrived during one of the busiest lunch periods of the week, ensuring there would be dozens upon dozens of potential victims inside.
Wow. Investigators, well, they also came to believe that Hennard never expected to leave Lubys alive. His actions during the attack, the amount of ammo he had, the way the shooting ultimately ended, all pointed toward a man who anticipated dying that very day. Whether he expected to be killed by responding officers or intended from the beginning to take his own life, we'll never know, unless we find a manifesto somewhere. What the evidence does support, though, is that the massacre was planned. The choice of target, deliberate. Even the exact reason remains unknown, though. And that October 16th, 1991, it was intended to be the final day of George Hennard's life and many people in that restaurant. The morning, Wednesday, 16th of October, 1991. It began without anything to suggest the horror that would unfold just the afternoon. The day after his 35th birthday, George Hennard went through an ordinary routine. On the surface, looked no different from countless other mornings. Investigators later determined that he stopped for breakfast. He had a sausage biscuit, some donuts, a candy bar, a little bit of orange juice, wash it all down before continuing on with his day.
It's a hell of a breakfast, bud.
Yeah. To the people who crossed paths with him that morning, there was nothing that immediately stood out.
Oh, it's just George still being a dick today.
Right.
You know?
He wasn't involved in an argument.
Oh.
He didn't attract
See,
any
that should have been
attention.
like the biggest sign right there. Like, this dude's not
Just
arguing.
telling
He
you,
just
like,
held doors open for people and shit.
Good day.
Good day, my lady.
You look good, man. Right. Or whatever. Nothing gave no outward indication that he was about to carry out one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. As the morning continued, Hennard drove around Killeen with the weapons and ammo and the magazines he assembled for the attack. Exactly what he was thinking, nobody knows, obviously. And he left behind no reliable explanation of his plan. So,
No manifesto.
what investigators were able to establish, though, is that his actions were consistent with someone carrying out a plan that had already been made. It's still speculation. Nothing suggests the decision was spontaneous or triggered by something that happened that morning. And by the time he got behind the wheel of his blue Ford Ranger pickup, the evidence indicates he already decided what he was going to do.
Shortly before 12:40 that afternoon, Hennard, he headed toward Lubys on East Central Texas Expressway. Inside, like we said, it was a lunchtime rush in full swing. About 150 people serving line. They're talking with coworkers, eating with family, and enjoying what every other Wednesday would be like. Employees, like we said, moved between tables, refilled drinks, sucked up to the customers for an extra tip or two. Outside, traffic flowed normally. Nothing appeared out of place. Just a regular old Wednesday.
I don't think this guy has any effect how the day's going to go.
Yeah, but sometimes there's, people are like, I knew something bad was going to happen today.
Something weird told me not to go.
As Hennard approached the parking lot, there was still time to change his mind. He could have turned around, driven away, or he just abandoned the plan altogether. Instead, what did he do? He steered his pickup truck directly toward the front entrance. Just a matter of seconds, the ordinary lunchtime routine inside Lubys was about to come to a violent and irreversible end.
Oh, my.
Approximately 12:39, Wednesday, October 16th. George, he turned his blue 1987 Ford Ranger off the roadway and headed straight toward the front of Luby's Cafeteria.
Oh.
Instead of slowing down or pulling into a parking space, he accelerated into the restaurant, crashing through the large plate glass window with tremendous force. Glass, bricks, and twisted metal exploded across the dining room as the pickup came to a stop among the tables. For a brief moment, many of the roughly 150 people inside believed something terrible happened.
Right.
A freaking
Oh,
accident.
shit.
Did the guy have a heart attack or something? Some diners and staff instinctively, they rushed toward him, thinking the driver was injured and needed help. To their dismay, Hennard reached for the two 9mm pistols he got and began firing while he was still inside the cab of the pickup. One of the first people struck was a local veterinarian, Dr. Michael Griffith. The sound of the gunfire echoed through the cafeteria, replacing the normal lunchtime chatter with confusion and panic. Many people still couldn't comprehend what was happening. Some just froze, others dropped to the floor or looked for anywhere to hide.
Right. You tell me in Killeen, Texas, nobody has a fucking gun on their hip? Hennard, he climbed out of the truck and he shouted, "All women of Killeen and Belton, vipers! This is what you've done to me and my family. This is what Bell County did to me. This is payback day." Those words made it clear this wasn't an accident or a robbery. Oh, it was a robbery of lives for sure. It was a deliberate attack. Pistol in each hand, he began walking through the crowded cafeteria, firing at customers and employees as he moved deeper and deeper into the restaurant. Witnesses later described Hennard as frighteningly calm. Rather than firing wildly and running through the building, he was just walking at a steady pace.
Same way the dude at the San Ysidro McDonald's.
He only stopped to aim, fire, and reload. Some survivors later recalled that the pauses between bursts of gunfire were almost as terrifying as the shots themselves, because they knew he was simply changing magazines before continuing on. Others said they initially mistook the gunfire for something else until they saw people collapsing. Within seconds, the dining room dissolved into complete chaos as people dove beneath tables, crawled behind booths, or desperately searched for an escape route. As this panic spread, Hennard continued moving throughout the restaurant, calmly and casually. According to witnesses, he confronted one woman, called her a vulgar name, shot her. Moments later, he spotted another woman hiding beneath the bench. near the serving line. "Hiding from me, bitch," he shouted before opening fire again. The attack only been underway for moments, but it was already clear that every second mattered. And throughout that cafeteria, terrified customers and employees were making split-second decisions that would determine whether they lived or died. As the shooting continued, Hennard moved through the cafeteria with the survivors described as a chilling sense of purpose. He didn't appear to be in a hurry. Instead, he walked through the dining room, firing, stopping, reloading, firing, stopping, reloading. One of the people caught Hennard's path, Steve Ernst, hiding beneath the table in hopes of avoiding the gunmen. Ernst watched as Hennard approached. Oh, no. When he reached the table, Hennard fired, seriously wounding him. Ernst rolled onto his side, clutching his stomach, unable to do anything but hope the gunman would just keep on fucking moving. Or if not, he wouldn't know. Nearby, terrified customers remained motionless beneath tables and booths, afraid that even the slightest movement would draw Hennard's attention. Damn it. This piece of shit.
Well, a short time later, Hennard came upon a woman holding a crying baby.
No, don't you do it.
Looking directly at her, he shouted, "You with the baby, get out of here before I change my mind."
Oh.
She didn't hesitate. Clutching her child, she rushed toward the exit, escaping the cafeteria. Moments after that, another burst of gunfire struck Steve Ernst's wife in the arm.
Oh, no.
The bullet continued through her body before striking and killing her 70-year-old mother, Venice Ellen Hennahan.
Son of a...
It was more of an example of how unpredictable and indiscriminate the violence inside the restaurant had become. Even those who were not the intended target could be killed within an instant.
Right.
Throughout the... I say everybody's an intended target, aren't they? Right. Regardless of how it happened for them. Throughout the cafeteria, customers and employees were making impossible decisions. Some, they remained perfectly still beneath the tables. Others crawled across the floor using overturned chairs and booths for what little cover they could find. Parents shielded children with their own bodies. Husbands and wives reached for one another as bullets shattered dishes, splintered furniture, and tore through the crowded dining room. Employees, they shouted directions towards the kitchen and the rear exits whenever they saw an opportunity.
Right.
Tried as hard as they could to move people to safety without drawing the gunmen's attention.
Damn it.
Near the back of the cafeteria, 28-year-old Tommy Vaughn, he realized there was almost no way out. Huddled on the floor beside a large window, he made a split-second decision that would save some lives.
Okay.
He threw himself through the window, shattered it, and created an opening to the outside. The escape route immediately became a lifeline.
Dude, that could have killed him, too.
Terrified customers climbed, crawled, and scrambled through the broken window as quickly as possible. Some helped complete strangers over the jagged glass, and while others reached back inside to pull more people through.
Right.
In the panic, people pushed, stumbled, and fell over one another, but they kept moving. By the time the first police officers arrived just minutes later, roughly a third of the people who had been inside, they managed to escape through the doors, windows, and any opening they could find.
Okay.
Sadly, many others remained trapped inside with the gunman that was, as the attack entered its final minutes. While Hennard continued moving through the cafeteria, we had some acts of courage unfolding all around him. None of the people inside had trained for, obviously, a moment like this, but many instinctively put the safety of others ahead of their own. Parents threw themselves over their children. Husbands and wives tried to shield one another. Complete strangers reached out to pull wounded people behind booths, beneath tables, or in any space that offered even the smallest amount of protection. In the middle of the chaos, countless split-second decisions made the difference between life and death.
Yes, it does.
And some heroes.
Wow. The employees refused to abandon their customers. As opportunities presented themselves, staff members directed frightened diners through the kitchen and toward rear exits, helping people escape whenever Hennard moved to another part of the restaurant, or even paused to reload. Get the fuck up. He pausing around. I guess it don't take that long to reload, but shit.
Right.
Others stayed with the wounded, offering comfort and trying to keep calm despite the gunfire still echoing. Every movement carried enormous risk, but many employees chose to help others before thinking about their own safety. Hell yeah. Survivors, they remembered dozens of small acts of bravery that never made national headlines. Some whispered to those hiding nearby when they thought it was safe to move. Others, they quietly warned people which direction Hennard was walking so they could get the hell out of the way. Several of those people who escaped through the window that Tommy Vaughn had broken, they didn't run away. Instead, they turned back and reached through the shattered opening, helping frightened strangers climb over the jagged glass and pull children and elderly to safety. Even as panic spread, people who had never met before risked their own lives to save each other.
Look at that.
Fuck yeah, that's America, baby.
Unfortunately, though, not every act of courage ended in survival. Investigators found evidence that several victims had placed themselves between the gunman and members of their own families. Others remained beside loved ones who had been wounded rather than fleeing on their own.
Oh, yeah.
These decisions reflected the same instinct seen in tragedies throughout history. You got to protect the people closest to you, even when doing so places your own life in greater danger. While Hennard came to Lubys intended to spread fear and destruction, the actions of many inside the restaurant showed a very different side of human nature.
All right.
As survivors continued escaping through the broken windows, doors, any route, The sound of approaching sirens grew louder and louder.
I hope so. Holy shit.
Police officers arriving at the scene still only had fragments of info from frantic 911 callers, but they knew people were trapped, and they knew somebody was still shooting. Within moments, they would confront Hennard, bringing the massacre into its final and most critical stage.
All right, you see how these coppers do.
As the attack continued, first 911 calls flooded local dispatchers within the first minutes of the shots being fired. Callers struggled to explain what was happening, reporting that a man with 2 handguns was shooting people inside the crowded cafeteria.
That's all you need to know.
Right. Officers from the Killeen Police Department, they rushed toward the restaurant. They initially knew that only there was an active shooter and dozens of people trapped inside. Approximately 12:42 to 12:45, patrol cars began arriving outside as frightened survivors ran from the building, many of whom covered in blood or even helping wounded family members and strangers to safety.
Responding officers quickly located Hennard inside a restaurant and attempted to stop him right away. Gunfire was exchanged as police confronted him through the shattered front of the building. During that exchange, one officer struck Hennard and wounded him. Obviously, if he struck him. Rather than surrender, Hennard backed away from the officers and retreated deeper into the cafeteria before making his way into a restroom. Although shooting inside the dining room finally stopped for now, officers still had no way of knowing whether he intended to continue fighting or if anyone else was in danger. Police surrounded the restroom and repeatedly ordered Hennard to come out. He refused this, at one point telling officers, "No, I'm going to kill more people."
You think so, bud?
He remained inside for several minutes. Then, 12:51 p.m., a single gunshot echoed from behind the closed door. When officers eventually entered, they found that Hennard had used one of his own pistols to shoot himself in the head. The man who carried out the massacre would never stand trial or explain his actions in court, which got to be the most unsettling thing. People just never got to know.
And the fact that he never left anything why he did what he did. It was
Right.
just, only thing they had was just writings of him hating people. I mean, or women specifically. And they never said, I'm going to do this on this day and this is why.
Right. Well, the questions surrounding his motives will forever be speculated and hopefully answered through evidence that would be collected in an investigation that was just beginning. Will they ever find it? And it'll always be a topic of discussion.
Speculation.
Right. The violence had lasted only about 12 minutes, but the devastation it left behind lasted a lifetime. 23 innocent people dead, dozens wounded. It's one of the largest crime scenes in Texas history. Outside, officers, firefighters, paramedics, terrified survivors still trying to make sense of what the fuck just happened here in Killeen, Texas. For many of the wounded, the fight for survival was far from over. Officers secured the building and confirmed that the threat had ended. Emergency medical crews rushed in to begin the enormous task of treating the injured and getting them to the hospitals as quickly as possible. So they couldn't treat these people until the guy was...
Yeah, they usually
Right.
put ambulance and firefighters on standby while there's an active threat.
That's crazy.
The moment police confirmed the gunfire had indeed stopped, the focus shifted immediately from stopping the attacker to saving as many lives as possible.
Damn right.
Paramedics, firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical personnel, they moved rapidly into the cafeteria and were met with a scene unlike anything most of them had ever experienced.
What do you do?
The dining room was filled with overturned tables, broken glass, abandoned trays of food, and most importantly, victims scattered throughout the restaurant. Well, some people, they were able to walk out on their own despite their injuries, while others, they required immediate treatment where they had fallen. First responders worked quickly to determine who needed help first, making life and death decisions in a matter of seconds. As triage began, ambulances from Killeen and surrounding communities were called in to handle the overwhelming number of casualties. The scale of the attack quickly exceeded the resources that had initially arrived,
Right.
prompting additional emergency crews from neighboring departments to respond.
Damn.
Patients were loaded into ambulances as quickly as possible and transported to hospitals anywhere that they had an open bed.
Right.
There, doctors, nurses, surgeons, and emergency room staff were already preparing for an influx of gunshot victims. Medical personnel who had been expected an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, well, they found themselves treating one of the largest mass casualty incidents Texas had ever experienced. None less Texas, the whole country.
Damn. Wow. Inside those very hospitals, teams, they worked around the clock to stabilize the wounded. Operating rooms filled rapidly as surgeons raced to stop internal bleeding, repaired shattered bones, and removed bullets. Emergency departments prioritized patients based on severity of their injuries, while hospital staff contacted family members, coordinated with law, and searched for ways to identify victims that had arrived without identification or whose loved ones still had no idea where they were. The emotional toll on doctors, nurses, paramedics, and other medical personnel immense. Many would later recall that the sheer number of victims arriving in such a short period was unlike anything that have ever encountered before.
Imagine that, hundreds just walking in.
Outside that very restaurant of Lubys, families gathered behind police lines desperately searching for information. Some waited anxiously for word that a loved one had survived. Others were directed from hospital to hospital, hoping to find missing relatives. Jeez, that's even worse. While many would ultimately receive the devastating news that someone they cared about would never be coming home. Although that shooting itself had ended in just 12 minutes, the work of saving lives, identifying victims, notifying families, and caring for survivors had only just begun. For emergency responders and medical personnel alike, October 16th, 1991 would forever become a day they would carry with them the rest of their lives.
As the wounded were being treated, families waited for the news. The full human cost of the massacre slowly became clear. Like we said, 23 people killed, 10 of them with a single shot to the head.
Damn.
Another 27 been wounded. They range in age from 29 to 75 years old. I guess there's a caveat there that no little kids were killed. Some, they retired, enjoying lunch together. Others were there for National Bosses Day. Several military families and local residents who had simply stopped in just for a meal. None of them could have imagined that a routine Wednesday lunch would become the final chapter of their lives. Patricia Carney, 57. Jimmy Carruthers, 48. Karem Hill Davis, 62. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Doty, USA, 43. Alphonse L. Gracia, 71. Ursula Gracia, 67. Deborah Gray, 33. Dr. Michael Griffith, 48. Venice Allen Henahan, 70. Claudine Humphrey, 63. Sylvia King, 30. Zona Lynn, 65. Connie Peterson, 41. Ruth Puhol, 55. Suzanne Rachat, 36. John Romero Jr., 29. Thomas Simmons, 33. Glenn Arville Spivey, 55. Nancy Stansberry, 44. Olga Taylor, 45. James Welsh, 75. Lula Welsh, 75. Iva Juanita Williams, 64.
So mostly women. Very few men there around the women.
They were just there, right?
Wow. All these victims came from communities all across Central Texas, including Killeen, Belton, Copperas Cove, Temple, Waco, Austin, and the surrounding area. They represented a cross-section of everyday America. Grandparents, parents, husbands, wives, veterans, teachers, business professionals, longtime members of their own communities. Some had spent decades building careers and raising families. Others, they still had many years ahead. Their lives were in different countless ways. But on the 16th of October, they were all brought together by nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. For the families left behind, the tragedy did not end when the shooting stopped. Children lost parents, husbands lost wives, wives lost husbands, brothers, sisters, friends, and co-workers were suddenly forced to cope with losses that had coming without warning. Those who survived physically often faced months or years of surgeries, rehabilitations, emotional recovery. Many carried lifelong scars, both visible and invisible. Even people who escaped without being wounded spoke in later years about recurring nightmares, anxiety, survivor's guilt, and memories that never completely failed. Have anybody ever committed suicide in this group?
I don't think so.
One of the lasting lessons of Luby shooting. Tragedies like this, they're measured by far more than casualty statistics. It's easy to remember that 23 people died and 27 were wounded. But those numbers represent individual lives, families, friendships, and futures that forever changed. Every empty chair at a dinner table, every missed birthday, every grandchild who grew up without a grandparent, every survivor who continued living with the memories became part of the legacy of that October afternoon. Before investigators could begin answering why, they first had to identify every victim, notify every family, and carefully piece together exactly what the hell happened inside this Central Texas cafeteria. Once every
victim had been accounted for and the wounded had been transported to hospitals, the investigators had begun the painstaking task of reconstruction exactly what happened inside the cafeteria.
You gotta go through every bullet. Oh my!
The restaurant was sealed off as a crime scene. Obviously, teams of investigators spent hours documenting every detail before anything could even be moved. They photographed the dining room, marked the locations of shell casings, mapped bullet trajectories, examined the damage caused by the pickup truck crashing through the front window in the first place, carefully recorded where each victim and survivor had been during the attack. Every single piece of evidence that helped build a minute-by-minute timeline of the massacre. Hennard's 2 9mm pistols that were recovered from the scene, along with numerous spent shell casings, loaded mags, and unused ammo. ballistics testing, they confirmed both weapons had been used during the attack. Investigators were able to match recovered bullets and cartridge casings to the firearms, obviously.
All right.
The evidence also showed that Hennard had reloaded multiple times while moving through the cafeteria, reinforcing witnesses' accounts that described brief pauses in the gunfire before it resumed. His pickup truck, it was searched, provided investigators with additional evidence about the planning that had gone into the attack. At the same time, detectives began digging into his past. They interviewed relatives, neighbors, former co-workers, acquaintances, and anyone who'd even come across them. Those interviews painted a remarkably consistent picture. Again and again, people described him increasingly isolated and blamed others for his failures. He expressed deep resentment toward women, behaved erratically, and become progressively more hostile as the years passed. Investigators also examined his criminal history, employment records, prior police contacts, and personal writings in an effort to understand what the hell drove this dude to commit this.
Crazy.
Although investigators uncovered overwhelming evidence of Hennard's long-standing anger, paranoia, and misogynistic beliefs, they never really identified a single event that triggered it.
All right.
Nor did they find any evidence that he had selected Lubys because of a personal grudge against anyone inside. The victims appeared to have been chosen simply because they were there. Investigators concluded the attack was planned in advance and that Hennard fully expected to die. But some questions could never be answered because obviously he wasn't there to answer them. Over the years, a number of myths have grown around the case, including the claims that he targeted only women or that police failed to confront him. The evidence tells a more complete story, though. While his hatred of women is well documented and likely influenced his actions, men obviously were among those he murdered. Responding officers did indeed engage him and actually hit him with some bullets.
All right.
By the time the investigation was complete, and they were there in a remarkable time because he started at 12:39 and they were there by 12:42.
Right.
But he were still, if they were there by 12:42 and he started at 12:39 and killed himself at 12:51, that means they were there for a whole 9 minutes.
All right.
What did they do?
Trying to access the fucking...
He's in there shooting.
Right. Well,
I mean, I guess you're not just going to run in.
Right.
But, same thing that happened at San Ysidro, by the way. By the time the investigation was complete, though, authorities had established a clear picture of how the massacre unfolded, even if some of the reasons behind it would never be known. Among the survivors of the massacre, no story would have a greater impact on the years that followed than that of Susanna Gracia Hupp. That day, she'd gone to Luby's with her parents, Al and Ursula Gracia. It was supposed to be just an ordinary lunch. Like everyone else in the restaurant, they had no warning their lives were about to change. When Hennard began shooting, Hupp found herself hiding and desperately trying to survive while watching the attack unfold around her. Her parents both shot. Despite efforts to save them, neither survived. In later interviews, she spoke about the helplessness she felt as the attack continued. She knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. The loss of both of her parents in a matter of minutes became the defining tragedy of her life, as I would expect.
All right. One detail from that afternoon will become central to her public story. Hupp legally owned a handgun.
That's fine.
But because Texas law at the time prohibited her from carrying it into the restaurant, she had left it locked in her car. In the years that followed, she repeatedly said she believed that decision left her unable to defend herself or her parents when the shooting began exactly. She also been careful to acknowledge that no one can know with certainty how events would have unfolded had she had been armed. But she had consistently maintained that she wanted the opportunity to try rather than be left completely defenseless. Rather than withdrawing from the public life, Hupp became one of the most recognizable voices in the national debate over self-defense and concealed law carries.
You damn right. Go, girl.
She testified before lawmakers, gave interviews across the country, and argued that responsible, law-abiding citizens should have the ability to carry firearms for personal protection everywhere. Her testimony about losing both of her parents in that small Central Texas town become one of the most widely cited personal accounts during the debate over concealed handgun legislation. And in 1995, Texas stepped up, passed its concealed handgun law. And while the legislation was the result of years of political debate involving many people and organizations, that Lubys massacre on that October afternoon, Hupp's firsthand account of it became one of the most enduring symbols. She later served in the Texas House of Reps.
Look at you.
Where she continued to advocate for the issues that had grown out of the tragedy that changed her life forever.
Look at you.
In the days after the massacre, Killeen became a community in mourning. Churches filled with grieving families. Memorial services held all across Central Texas. Flags flew at half-staff as residents struggled to come to terms of what had happened. Funerals for the victims took place over the following days, bringing together relatives, friends, and co-workers. Personal military personnel, and complete strangers who just simply wanted to pay their respects. What had begun as a local tragedy quickly became national, with reporters from all across the country and probably world.
All across the country, being like little fucking
Right.
parasites and
Little douchebags.
harassing everybody.
Putting cameras in front of people's faces
Right.
and shit. They all descended upon Killeen, Texas. They wanted that story to shoot on their hometown news. For the employees of Lubys, well, returning to everyday life, well, that wasn't simple. Many had witnessed unimaginable violence while trying to protect customers and coworkers. Survivors, they faced the same challenges. Some were recovering from serious physical injuries, others battling with injuries in their heads, right? In the months and years that followed, many spoke openly about nightmares, anxiety, depression, and survivor's guilt.
Survivor's guilt, probably the main one.
Yeah, PTSD or whatever.
Right.
Certain sounds, crowded places, even walking into a restaurant could trigger vivid memories of that afternoon. Others chose to remain out of the public eye, carrying their experiences privately for the rest of their lives.
One of the most difficult questions facing the community was what should happen to the restaurant itself. Some believed the building should be torn down immediately because of the painful memories attached to it. Others, they argued that permanently closing Lubys would cost dozens of employees their jobs and allow the gunman to take even more from the community. After extensive cleaning, repairs, and discussions with employees and local leaders, the cafeteria was eventually reopened. For some survivors and family members, returning to the restaurant represented an important step toward reclaiming a place that had been stolen from them. Others, they could never bring themselves to walk through its doors again. The location remained open until 2000 before eventually closing for unrelated business reasons, and the building later found new uses. As the immediate shock faded, the massacre continued to leave its mark in ways that weren't always visible. First responders carried memories of the crime scene long after the television cameras were gone. Medical personnel remembered the rush of patients that overwhelmed emergency rooms. Families learned to live with empty seats at holiday gatherings and birthdays that would never again be complete. Even decades later, anniversary interviews with survivors often reveal that October 16, 1991 is not just a distant memory, but something they continue to relive in different ways. While the community slowly rebuilt, the impact of those 12 minutes never truly disappeared. At the same time, the tragedy had already begun to influence conversations far beyond Killeen, becoming a major turning point in debates that would shape Texas and the nation for years to come. The Lubys cafeteria shooting quickly became far more than a local tragedy. It entered the national conversation about public safety, mental illness, emergency response, and firearms, influencing debates that continue more than 3 decades later. At the time, it was the deadliest mass shooting committed by a single gunman in American history, and its scale forced many communities across the country to reconsider how the cops, firefighters, paramedics, and hospitals would respond if a similar attack ever occurred. Although emergency planning has continued to evolve because of the later tragedies, Lubys remains one of the events that help shape how agencies prepare for large-scale active shooter incidents. Perhaps nowhere was the shooting's political impact felt more strongly than in Texas, obviously. Supporters of expanded concealed carry rights frequently pointed to the massacre as evidence that law-abiding citizens should be allowed to carry firearms for self-defense. They argued that the victims inside the restaurant had been left defenseless because Texas law at the time, like we said, you couldn't bring them into places. On the other side of the debate, advocates for stricter gun regulations viewed the shooting as just another example of the devastating consequences that can and will occur when firearms are used to commit acts of mass violence. Both sides cited the tragedy in support of very different policy goals, making the massacre one of the most frequently discussed events in Texas's gun law debate. Beyond politics, the legacy of Lubys is reflected in the way communities think about preparedness, victim support, and long-term recovery after acts of mass violence. It highlighted the importance of coordinated emergency response, trauma care, counseling for survivors, and assistance for victims' families long after the headlines fade. The massacre also underscored a difficult reality that has been repeated in later tragedies. While the attack itself may last only a couple minutes, maybe, the consequences are measured in years and often generations. The lessons learned in Killeen continue to influence discussions about how communities respond, recover, and remember after unimaginable acts of violence. For nearly 16 years, the Lubys cafeteria shooting remained the deadliest mass shooting committed by a single gunman in modern American history. That record stood until the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007. But Lubys has never faded from history because of the profound impact it had on Texas, the nation, and the families forever changed that afternoon. More than 3 decades have passed since George Henner drove his pickup truck through the front windows of Lubys. But the events of October 16, 1991 remain deeply woven in the history of Texas and the United States. Although, like we said, later mass shootings would surpass it in the number of people killed, the Lubys massacre remains one of the most defining tragedies of its era because of the lives it claimed, the questions it raised, and the lasting changes it helped inspire. For the people of Killeen, however, it was never been just simply a historical event. It's a memory tied to neighbors, friends, co-workers, and family members whose lives ended far too soon. Each anniversary brings renewed remembrance for the 23 victims and the dozens of survivors whose lives were permanently altered. Memorial ceremonies, moments of reflection, and interviews with survivors continue to remind new generations of what happened that afternoon. Many of those who escaped have spoken about carrying the experience with them every day, while family members have worked to preserve the memories of loved ones who never came home. Their stories ensure that the victims are remembered as people with families, careers, dreams, and futures, not just a statistic. The Luby shooting also stands as a reminder that the acts of mass violence they leave wounds that extend far beyond the moment the gunfire stops. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, doctors, nurses, investigators, employees, and countless others who responded that day carry these memories long after the crime scene was cleared. For many, the emotional impact lasted a lifetime. The tragedy demonstrated that an entire community could become part of the aftermath, even if only one person pulled the trigger. Looking back today, it's easy to focus on the statistics, the political debates, or the place the shooting holds in history. Those things are only part of the story. At its heart, the Lubys Cafeteria Massacre was about ordinary people whose lives intersected for a few terrible minutes because one man chose violence. Families were forever changed, a community was forced to heal from unimaginable loss, and a nation was left searching for answers that, in some respects, never even came. The story of Lubys endures not because of the man who committed the attack, but because of the victims who should have returned home that afternoon, the survivors who found the strength to keep living, and the countless people who refused to let their memories fade with time. Wow. Jeez, nothing else to say there. We'll end it there. Just remember, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and come back next week for another episode of Outlaws, Gunslingers. We'll see you then. We're Mouth Michiganders. Bang, dang.